Is Illinois poised to legalize prostitution? This is a question that I wanted to address because I've seen a lot of interesting discussions about this on the internet. And of course, these discussions were prompted by SB 2391. That's a piece of legislation that's been proposed here in the state of Illinois. The short answer to this question is no. I don't believe Illinois is on the verge of legalizing prostitution. The purpose of the proposed legislation is to prevent the arrest, charging, and prosecution of so called sex workers. Nothing in the bill that I can see leads me to believe that there's any kind of framework that's being created for legalized prostitution or the kind of legalized brothels that you see in places like Nevada or Amsterdam or Germany. The purpose of the bill, of course, is decriminalization, which there's a big distinction to be made between decriminalization and legalization. Now, of course, as the bill makes its way through the legislative process, there are changes that can be made. I will say this. I'm somewhat surprised that this type of legislation was even proposed because it goes against some trends that I've observed in Illinois law over the last decade and a half, and I've written about this before. A couple years back, I made some videos and I wrote an article how I believed that Illinois was heading in the direction of the so-called Nordic model approach to prostitution regulation. And the Nordic model approach is essentially a feminist Marxist approach to prostitution. It's predicated on the idea that prostitution is a form of male oppression of women. And while these laws are typically written in a gender neutral way, the idea is that they're supposed to target the male purchasers of these services who are under that view engaging in a kind of exploitation. So under these laws, typically it's legal for so-called sex workers to sell their services, but it's illegal for purchasers to purchase those services. And you see this approach in Canada, in France, of course in the Nordic countries, I believe also in Ireland and Northern Ireland and a few other European countries. I was of the belief that Illinois was headed in that direction, and that was based on some changes that I observed in the law. About a decade and a half ago, they started lessening the penalties for those who sold these services. So they did away, for instance, with felony prostitution. That's where if prostitutes had multiple convictions, they could be charged with a felony. They did away with that. They made it easier for prostitutes to have their records expunged. At the same time, on the other side of the equation, they upped the penalties and made these charges more serious for those who purchase these services. Patronizing a prostitute was always a misdemeanor until 2010. At that time, it became a felony. Solicitation of prostitution was still a misdemeanor, but you couldn't have those records expunged. So I thought we were trending in that direction. Now, what's interesting about this piece of legislation is it doesn't just decriminalize these offenses on the prostitute side of the equation, it also does away with these crimes on the purchaser side. So, for instance, under this piece of legislation, patronizing a prostitute would no longer even be a crime. Now, we're early here in the legislative process. What I suspect will probably happen, and I'm always careful about making predictions because I've been wrong before. What I suspect will happen as various activist organizations fight over this piece of legislation, They'll probably remove all the provisions that take away the penalties on the purchaser side of the equation, but they'll probably keep all of the provisions that decriminalize these offenses on the sex worker side. So what you'll end up with, probably, I would suspect, if this legislation even passes, which who knows, but if it does pass, I suspect what you'll end up with is something akin to the Nordic model here in Illinois. Regardless, fascinating discussions, very interesting developments. We'll see where this goes.